Welcome, friends, to another gentle tale from the Chestnut Hollow Journal. Today we return to the cozy woods, where small creatures go about their quiet days in warmth and wonder. Find yourself a comfortable spot, perhaps a warm drink by your side, and let's step together into the peaceful world of Chestnut Hollow. The lantern beneath the willow. Mist drifted low across the reed beds that morning, as though the river itself were still half asleep beneath its pale shawl. The first breath of dawn barely touched the rippling water, and the great willow that stood sentry along the bend wore its dew like diamonds upon her long, weeping hair. Beneath her, nestled in a snug earthen burrow half hidden by moss and wild mint, lived Bramble Hedgehog, a creature of deep habit and quiet comfort. He was not one to rush into the day. In fact, it might be said that Bramble considered haste to be one of the forest's few real vices. On most mornings, he lit his small oil lamp, stirred the embers in his stove, and brewed a cup of nettle tea while listening to the river's muttering voice. But on this morning, something was amiss. The flame in his lamp flickered strangely, guttering low, and then went out altogether, though the oil pot was full. Bramble frowned. "Well, that's not right," he muttered, rubbing his paws. "Not right at all." He fetched another match, struck it smartly, and held it to the wick, but the flame only sputtered and died again, leaving behind a faint smell of singed linen. Puzzled, he shuffled over to the doorway and peered out into the misty morning. Perhaps the dampness had seeped in through the burrow walls. Perhaps something was wrong with the wick. Before long, he decided to pay a visit to Hazel Mouse, who lived just up the path in a hollow oak, for she was known for her clever paws and knack for fixing things. He wrapped a scarf around his neck, tucked the stubborn lamp into a satchel, and stepped out into the chill. The forest was quiet, save for the sighing of the breeze through rushes and the soft drip of water from leaves. Everything smelled of rain and earth and the green promise of another day. As Bramble made his way along the winding path, the mist thinned a little, revealing tiny cobwebs strung with pearls and the dark glint of the river below. When he reached Hazel's oak, he found her already up and about, sweeping her doorstep with brisk, efficient strokes. She wore a small apron and had a bit of flour on her nose. She'd been baking, it seemed. "Good morning, Bramble," she called, cheerful as always. "You're out early. Something the matter?" "I suppose you could say that," Bramble replied, holding up his satchel. "My lamp's gone queer on me. Won't hold a flame. Thought you might take a look." Hazel set aside her broom and ushered him in. Her home smelled delicious, something buttery and nutty baking in the oven. Bramble tried not to look too hopeful, but his stomach betrayed him with a polite grumble. "I've got chestnut biscuits coming out soon," she said, grinning. "You'll have one, of course." As she examined the lamp on her work table, Hazel frowned thoughtfully. Nothing wrong with the wick or the oil. You say it went out by itself?" "Aye," Bramble nodded. "Twice. Right peculiar, isn't it?" Hazel tilted her head. "You know," she mused, "Mole down by the river's been having odd troubles too. Said his lanterns have been dimming, especially at night. Perhaps something's in the air, too damp, maybe. Or the willow's gone and swallowed all the light." Bramble muttered half to himself, remembering an old saying the elders used to tell. Hazel laughed. "The willow stealing light? Oh, Bramble, you and your tales." Though she paused, tapping her chin, "It is strange." After tea and biscuits, Bramble took his leave, determined to check with Mole. The path dipped steeply toward the river, where Mole's snug house sat half-buried beneath a tangle of roots. A faint glow leaked from his round window, but when Bramble knocked, the light flickered as if in greeting and then went out altogether. "Confound it," came Mole's muffled voice. "Come in, Bramble. I've just lost the blasted lamp again." Inside, Mole was surrounded by tools, candles, and an expression of mild exasperation. "I don't know what's gotten into them," he sighed. "Every time I light one, it fades. Even in new ones." Bramble set down his own lamp beside Mole's, both now as dull and lifeless as stones. "Looks like we've the same trouble, my friend," he said gravely. Mole adjusted his spectacles and leaned close to the lamps. "It's as if the light's being drawn out of them somehow." Outside, the mist thickened again, coiling close around the willow's boughs. The river shimmered faintly, like something alive beneath its surface. The two friends exchanged a look, half curious, half uneasy. Whatever was happening, it seemed centered near the willow that guarded the band. "Tomorrow," Bramble said after a long silence, "we'll take a closer look by daylight. Bring your walking stick, and I'll bring the stoutest candle I've got left." And so it was agreed. The mystery of the dimming lamps would not go unanswered, even if it led them straight beneath the willow's sighing branches, where the oldest roots touched the quiet dark of the riverbed. Outside, the first raindrops began to fall, whispering softly against the moss and reeds. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as though listening to some secret being whispered through the mist. The rain lingered through the night, soft and steady, like the world was washing itself clean. When morning came, the mist had thinned, but a chill clung stubbornly to the air. Bramble Hedgehog bundled himself in his thick scarf, tucked a candle into his satchel beside a small loaf of hazelnut bread, and set off down the slope toward Mole's burrow. The ground squelched under his paws, and every fern seemed to sparkle with drops that clung like tiny stars. Mole was waiting by his door, hat already on, walking stick in hand. "Morning, Bramble," he said, puffing slightly. "I made tea, but it's gone cold. I suppose that's as good a sign as any. Even my stove's lost its spark." "That's exactly what we're about to fix," Bramble said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Let's see what that willow's hiding." They made their way to the riverbed. The great willow loomed above them, its drooping branches trailing into the slow water like green curtains. The air smelled of moss and earth and something else, faintly metallic like the scent of rain before a storm. They walked around the base of the tree, searching among the roots. Here and there, tiny holes opened where voles or frogs had made their homes, but most of the ground was hidden beneath a web of roots, thick as a dozen ropes twisted together. "Looks older than anything else in the forest," Mole murmured, kneeling to brush away wet leaves. Bramble nodded. My grandam used to say this tree remembers the first thaw of the first spring. Said it listens to the earth's dreams." Mole chuckled softly. "Dreams or not, there's something strange happening. Look here." At the base of one root, tucked between two stones, something glowed faintly, a pulse of soft blue light, so dim it might have been a trick of the eye. Mole leaned closer. "Do you see it?" "Ido," Bramble whispered. "Like the light we've been missing." The glow flickered once, then faded as if embarrassed to have been noticed. The two friends exchanged a long look. "We'll need a lantern," Mole said finally. And Hazel's paused. "She's cleverer than both of us together." By afternoon, they were gathered in Hazel Mouse's kitchen, rain tapping gently at the round window. The kettle hummed on the stove, and the table was cluttered with notes, a lantern, and half-eaten slices of seed cake. "So, with the lights being drawn underground?" Hazel asked, eyes bright with curiosity. "Like it's being stolen?" Bramble nodded. "It felt that way, almost alive." Hazel tapped the lantern. "Then maybe it's not stealing. Maybe it's calling. There's old talk of roots carrying light during the long winters, so the trees remember the sun. Maybe your willow's taking more than her share." Mole frowned. "Could it be dangerous?" Hazel smiled. "Only if you try to stop her. But maybe we can help her share back." That night, under a clearing sky, the three of them set out again, Bramble carrying his stubborn lamp, Mole with his tools, and Hazel with a small jar of fireflies she'd coaxed from the reeds. The moon hung low and wide, turning the willow's silver leaves into mirrors. At the river bend, the glow returned, stronger this time, humming faintly like a sleeping heartbeat. Hazel approached, careful and reverent. She loosened the soil around the root, revealing a hollow. Inside was a cluster of crystalline drops, like frozen dew, each one faintly luminescent. They're light stones, she breathed. Natural ones. The willow must have drawn them from the riverbed. As they watched, one of the crystals flickered weakly, as though gasping for air. "They're fading," Bramble said softly, "just like our lamps." Hazel hesitated only a moment. Then she opened her jar and let the fireflies drift toward the crystals. The little insects landed delicately, their bellies glowing, and suddenly, a spark leapt between them. The light swelled, gentle but bright, and spread through the whole cluster. The willow's branches shivered as though sighing in relief. The glow beneath the roots steadied, and when Bramble lit his lamp once more, the flame burned strong and golden. Mole let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Well," he said quietly, "I suppose we've mended the forest lamp as well as our own." Hazel smiled. No magic tricks, just balance. They stood beneath the willow for a long while, listening to the rustling of leaves that now seemed almost like laughter. When they finally turned to go, the river glimmered with faint blue ripples, reflections of the revived crystals below, and Bramble thought he saw the willow bow her branches in thanks. By the next morning, word had spread across the burrows and hollows that the lamps no longer dimmed. Squirrel lit his hearth for breakfast without trouble. Otter's riverside lanterns shone through the fog again. Even Old Toad at the bridge said his candles burned brighter than ever. Bramble, Mole, and Hazel became something of quiet heroes in the small woodland community, though none of them much cared for praise. Hazel returned to her kitchen, content with her oven's steady glow. Mole spent the day cleaning his tools, and Bramble took to polishing his lantern and thinking about how strange and gentle the world could be. But that afternoon, as he sat by his burrow door sipping tea, he noticed something curious. A small envelope had been slipped beneath his doorstep, damp around the edges, but sealed with a drop of wax shaped like a leaf. He opened it carefully. Inside was a short note, written in neat, curling script. "The willow thanks you. When the dark returns, light will answer your kindness. Keep your lamp trimmed and your heart open." There was no name, no mark, only the faint scent of mint and rain. Bramble stared at the note for a long while. He didn't quite know what to make of it, but somehow it warmed him more than the fire. He tucked it into the drawer beside his teacups and said nothing to anyone. The seasons turned slowly after that. The willow shed her leaves, and frost gathered on the reeds. When snow came, Bramble and his friends gathered often to share stews, tell stories, and trade little gifts. One evening, as the three sat in Bramble's burrow with the storm roaring outside, Mole suddenly said, "Do you ever think the willow's light might return someday? Properly, I mean." Bramble smiled at the flickering flame between them. "She already did, old friend. Every lamp we light carries a bit of her now." Hazel nodded, pouring more tea. "Then let's keep it burning." Outside, beyond the burrow walls, the willow stood quietly in the snow, its bare branches lit faintly from beneath. A single, soft glow pulsed deep in its roots, like a heartbeat, or perhaps a lantern waiting to be lit again. When spring returned, it brought a shy green shimmer to the forest. The air smelled of thawing soil and the first blossoms of wild garlic. Bramble and Mole met Hazel by the river one morning, where the willow now trailed new silver leaves into the water. "Do you see that?" Hazel said, pointing. Near the roots, a single crystal glowed beneath the surface, bright, steady, and golden now. That's one of the light stones, Bramble said, smiling. Looks stronger than ever. Maybe it'll never fade again, Mole added hopefully. They spent the morning clearing winter debris, gathering reeds, and tending the soil near the willow's base. It felt less like work and more like caring for an old friend. By midday, the river hummed with life, dragonflies, minnows, and the gentle call of frogs. Bramble leaned against a root, eyes half closed. Strange, isn't it? How the smallest thing, a lamp, a spark, can carry warmth through a whole season. Hazel nodded softly. It's what keeps us together, even when the light's gone for a bit. The three friends shared a quiet laugh. The willow rustled as if in agreement, and sunlight broke through the canopy in dappled waves, setting the river ablaze with gold. For a long time, none of them spoke. There was no need. The forest was whole again. And if you passed the willow on a still night, you might have seen, or thought you saw, a faint lamp glowing at its roots, warm as a promise kept. By the time summer had woven itself deep into the forest, the willow's roots were thick with moss, its branches heavy with shimmering green. The river had slowed to a lazy drift, and the air carried a sweet stillness that made every sound, a bird's call, the flick of a fish's tail, feel like part of a slow, drowsy melody. Bramble Hedgehog found himself struggling with that peculiar sort of midsummer restlessness that comes when everything is too perfect to bother changing. He spent his mornings sweeping his little path clear of fallen petals, though it never stayed clean for long. He took to sitting on his doorstep with a slice of cool apple, watching the bees wander from bloom to bloom and thinking about nothing in particular. Hazel Mouse, on the other hand, could never quite sit still. Her burrow under the elm had become a maze of drying herbs, jars of syrup, and neatly bundled reeds. She claimed she was experimenting with cooling tonics, though the constant clinking of bottles and the occasional small boom suggested her experiments were equal parts chemistry and chaos. Mole, sensible as ever, divided his time between tending his vegetables and visiting Bramble to keep him from napping his days away. "You'll rust into your chair if you sit there much longer," he'd grumble good-naturedly, nudging Bramble's paw with his stick. "I'm contemplating," Bramble would reply, eyes still half shut. "What exactly? Existence. And whether I can exist and nap at the same time." Their talk would usually dissolve into laughter, and they'd end up walking to the river anyway, where the willow's cool shadow spread across the grass. It was under that shadow one afternoon that they noticed something new. Hazel, carrying a basket of mint leaves, stopped short and pointed. "Look," she whispered. At the base of the willow, between the roots where they'd once seen the glowing crystals, a cluster of mushrooms had sprouted. Not the usual pale caps, but tall, translucent ones that shimmered faintly even in daylight. When the wind stirred, they gave off a faint chime like tiny bells. Bramble crouched to study them. "Never seen those before. Do you think they're dangerous?" Hazel knelt beside him. "No, I think they're a sign. Maybe the willow's remembering." "Remembering what?" asked Mole. "The light," she said simply. The mushrooms became a small fascination in the weeks that followed. They grew in slow, steady spirals, changing color subtly from silver to gold. Hazel recorded their progress in her notebook. Bramble, though pretending indifference, checked on them every morning. Mole carved a small sign that read, "Do not step here, living light," and staked it proudly beside the patch. The forest around them seemed to hum with calm. Birds sang late into the evening, and the nights glowed softly with fireflies. There was no drama, no strange letters, no dimming lamps. Just a long, slow rhythm of life moving forward. Still, beneath the peace, Bramble felt a quiet tug. He couldn't quite name it. Not sadness, not worry, just a faint awareness that nothing ever truly stays still, even when it looks that way. One evening, he wandered down to the willow alone. The air was warm and thick with the scent of river mint. He lit his lantern and set it beside the roots. The mushrooms pulsed faintly in reply, their chiming soft and irregular. "You're still awake, then?" he murmured. "Good." He sat there for a long time, listening to the river's low murmur and the distant chorus of frogs. The willow's leaves rustled above him, not the restless clatter of storm wind, but a gentle, almost conversational sound. Bramble smiled faintly. "You remember too, don't you?" The leaves whispered something that might have been an answer, or maybe it was only the breeze. When he returned home, the moon was high, the burrows quiet. Hazel's window glowed faintly with candlelight, and from inside came the soft clatter of dishes and the hum of an old tune. Bramble paused a moment, feeling a swell of fondness for the small world around him. The lantern at his side flickered once, then steadied, as if echoing his thought. The peace of summer, of course, never lasted forever. It was Hazel who first broke it, though she didn't mean to. It began on a Wednesday, when she appeared at Bramble's door before sunrise, breathless, carrying an empty jar and a rather guilty expression. "Don't be cross," she said before he could even greet her, "but I may have misplaced something." Bramble blinked sleepily. "Hazel, it's barely dawn. I know, but it's important. Do you remember that batch of cooling tonic I was making? The one with the dew from the willow roots? The one that fizzed green and nearly melted your spoon?" "That's the one." She grimaced. "I left the jar outside to cool last night. When I went to fetch it this morning, it was gone. Gone. Completely. Vanished. Not even a paw print. By the time Mole joined them, half awake, muttering about lost breakfasts, Hazel was pacing in circles. It could be dangerous if someone drank it, she fretted. It wasn't finished. I didn't add the sweet root yet to balance the reaction. Mole rubbed his snout. "You're telling us there's an unfinished potion wandering the forest?" Bramble sighed. "Let's hope it doesn't sprout legs." They spent the better part of the morning searching. The jar trail led through the reeds and into the meadow, where the grass grew tall and shimmering in the heat. Here and there they found clues, a damp patch, a single tuft of fur, which Hazel identified as Vol, and at last, near the roots of an old oak, the jar itself. It was lying on its side, empty. The grass around it glittered faintly, as if dusted with frost. "Oh dear," Hazel whispered. "Is that bad?" Bramble asked. "It's not good," she said gravely. "Whatever drank, it is probably shivering right now, or glowing." They exchanged looks and began checking nearby burrows. It didn't take long before they found the culprit, a small, round vole named Tuppy, wrapped in blankets and sneezing dramatically in his front room. "I thought it was lemonade," he squeaked when Hazel scolded him. "It smelled minty." Hazel sighed and mixed a counterbrew on the spot, muttering under her breath the whole time. Bramble and Mole waited outside, trying not to laugh too loudly at the chorus of apologies echoing from within. When Hazel finally emerged, she carried the empty jar triumphantly. "He'll be fine," she declared. "Just needs rest and porridge. And perhaps a little less curiosity." Mole chuckled. "Remind me of someone else I know." Hazel shot him a look, then smiled despite herself. By the time they reached the willow again, the sun had dipped low, painting the river in amber light. Hazel set the jar carefully on a root and murmured, "No more wandering off. All right?" The willow leaves rustled faintly, a soft sound, almost like laughter. That night, as Bramble wrote his thoughts in a small journal, he paused, tapping the quill. "Strange how even the quietest days turn into small adventures," he wrote. "But perhaps that's what keeps life bright. Little mishaps that remind us how much light we carry, even when things go wrong." August came quietly, with air thick as honey and nights soft as velvet. The forest had grown slow and drowsy. Even the river murmured lazily, as though reluctant to leave its bed. Bramble Hedgehog had long since abandoned his broom and instead spent his evenings beneath the willow, lantern beside him, listening to the endless hum of crickets and frogs. Hazel Mouse had declared the season perfectly unbearable for serious work. Her experiments were on pause, and instead she had taken to making fans out of birch bark and painting them with wildflowers. Mole had dug himself deeper burrows to escape the heat, popping up only at dusk when the air cooled. Life settled into a rhythm of small comforts, slices of cold melon, afternoon naps, the occasional thunderstorm that sent them scrambling to close shutters. Nothing remarkable, nothing mysterious, until one night when the sound of the crickets changed. Bramble noticed it first. He had grown used to their rhythmic, even song, 1,000 small voices weaving together like a heartbeat. But that night the pulse wavered. Some notes were higher, sharper. Then, very faintly beneath it all, he heard something else, a tune, not random, but repeating a lilting pattern that rose and fell in gentle waves. He frowned, tilting his head. "That's new," he muttered. The next morning, he told Hazel and Mole. "They're just crickets," Hazel said dismissively, though her whiskers twitched with curiosity. "Probably a new brood." "No," Bramble said. "It's like a melody, like they're playing something." Mole chuckled. Maybe they're rehearsing for the midsummer dance. But that night, when Hazel went to fetch mint from the riverside, she stopped abruptly. The tune was unmistakable now, high, steady, and hauntingly beautiful. It seemed to shimmer through the air, weaving between the leaves. She followed it to the willow, where Bramble was already sitting, eyes closed, lantern flickering beside him. "Do you hear it?" he whispered. Hazel nodded slowly. "It's almost like the willow is singing through them." For a long time, they sat in silence, listening. The melody rose and fell like breath, neither happy nor sad, but full, as if the forest itself were remembering something it could no longer quite speak. When it finally faded, the night felt both emptier and more alive. Over the next few days, word spread among the woodland folk. The singing crickets, as they came to be called, became a quiet fascination. Small groups gathered near the willow each evening to listen. Rabbits with cups of nettle tea, sparrows perched on reeds, even old Mr. Badger, who claimed he hadn't believed in nonsense since he was a pup but came anyway, pretending to grumble. Hazel began taking notes again, charting the rhythm and pitch. "It's not random," she said one afternoon, tracing tiny dots across a scrap of parchment. "There's a pattern. Every 7 bars it repeats exactly." Bramble smiled. "Maybe it's the forest's heartbeat. Or a message," she whispered. That thought lingered. The idea that the willow, or something beneath it, might be trying to speak. But if there was meaning in the song, it never revealed itself. The tune continued for a week, then slowly faded back into ordinary chirps, as if the forest had sighed and gone back to sleep. When it ended, Bramble found himself missing it terribly. The silence afterward felt heavier, the nights less alive. Still, something in him had changed. He began to hum more often as he worked, little fragments of the tune caught in his mind. And sometimes, when the evening breeze rustled through the willow leaves, he could swear he heard a faint echo, not quite sound, but memory. By early September, the air had cooled just enough to stir the forest awake again. The leaves hadn't turned yet, but they had lost their summer gloss. The first whisper of autumn was in the wind. It was Mole who proposed it first. "We should have a fair," he said one morning over breakfast at Bramble's burrow. "Something small, before the cold sets in. It's been too quiet since the cricket stopped." Hazel clapped her paws. "A lantern fair." Bramble blinked. "And what now?" "Everyone makes their own lantern," Hazel said, already brimming with ideas. "We'll hang them all by the river, different shapes, different colors. And when the sun sets, we'll light them and let them drift. A goodbye to summer, a hello to autumn. Bramble grinned. You just like anything that glows. Maybe, she admitted, but so do you. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of gentle chaos. Every creature in the wood joined in. Rabbits gathered reeds and bark. Squirrels wove frames from twigs. The birds contributed feathers for decoration. Even stoic Mr. Badger carved intricate patterns into gourds, though he insisted it was strictly practical work. Bramble crafted his lantern from smooth birch and river glass, shaping it into a small dome. Inside, he placed a single crystal shard from the willow's roots, still faintly luminous. Hazel's was far more elaborate, a star-shaped sphere painted with swirls of silver and gold. To honor the singing nights, she said. Mole, ever practical, built one shaped like a turnip. When the night of the fair arrived, the whole forest gathered along the riverbank. Fireflies drifted lazily among the reeds. The air was warm but touched with the first hint of cool. Hazel stood on a rock, beaming. To light, she declared, raising her lantern, and to memory, that both may never fade. They dipped their lanterns into the water one by one. Dozens of tiny lights began to float downstream, bobbing gently in the current, their reflections scattering across the surface like 1,000 stars. For a long time, no one spoke. The sight was too beautiful, too fragile. Then, softly, someone began to hum, the melody of the crickets. One by one, voices joined in. Birds, moles, rabbits, even Bramble's low baritone. The forest seemed to glow from within. When the last lantern drifted out of sight, the song faded into the hush of the night. Hazel leaned against Bramble's shoulder. Do you think the willow's happy? She asked. Bramble smiled. I think it's proud. The willow leaves rustled faintly in the breeze, as if agreeing. That night, when the others had gone home, Bramble lingered by the river. The last lantern, his own, had caught on a root near the willow. He crouched to free it, then paused. Beneath the water's surface, the faint light of the willow's crystals glowed again, pulsing softly, like the echo of a heartbeat. He didn't tell anyone. Some things, he thought, were better left as quiet magic. Autumn came suddenly that year, as though the forest, tired of the long heat, had finally decided to breathe. The mornings turned crisp. The grass glittered with dew. One morning, Bramble woke to find a single golden leaf resting on his doorstep. It seemed like a small thing, but he smiled all the same. You're early, he told it. The leaf, of course, said nothing. But the air smelled different that day, sharper, cleaner, alive with change. Hazel switched from cooling tonics to spiced brews, filling the burrows with the scent of cinnamon and clover. Mole began storing root vegetables, humming to himself as he worked. Bramble collected nuts and lined his shelves with jars of dried fruit, though he often gave half of it away before winter even came. The willow's mushrooms, once bright and chiming, had dimmed now, fading to pale ivory. But their quiet glow still lingered faintly after dusk, like embers. One evening, as the three friends shared supper under the willow, Hazel asked softly, Do you ever think the magic might fade? Bramble looked up. What do you mean? Well, she said, stirring her tea, the mushrooms aren't glowing as much. The crystals are buried again. The song stopped. Maybe it's all ending. Mole leaned back, gazing at the branches overhead. Maybe it's not ending. Maybe it's just resting. Even magic needs sleep. Bramble nodded. And maybe it's not gone at all. Maybe it's just in us now. Hazel smiled faintly. You're both terribly sentimental. Maybe, Bramble said, but I like to think the light didn't just visit us. It stayed. That night, when they finally parted ways, the first true wind of autumn swept through the valley. Leaves spiraled down like sparks. The willow swayed, shedding gold into the river. Bramble watched them drift away, his lantern's glow merging with the moonlight. In the hush of the moment, he whispered, "Good night, old friend." And somewhere, deep beneath the willow's roots, something pulsed once, faint, warm, and alive. The first frost came silently in the night. When Bramble stepped outside the next morning, the entire world had turned to glass. Each blade of grass sparkled in the weak dawn light, every leaf rimmed with silver lace. Even the old wooden steps outside his burrow gleamed like sugar-coated bark. He drew in a deep breath. The air was sharp, almost sweet. The forest smelled new, crisp and clean, the kind of air that makes every sound ring clearer. Somewhere nearby, a robin sang a few cautious notes, as if testing how far its voice might travel. Bramble grinned and rubbed his paws together. "Winter's whispering," he said aloud, to no one in particular. He spent the morning checking on his stores: nuts, berries, dried mushrooms. Everything was in order, though he found himself adding 1 or 2 extra bundles of kindling. Just in case, as he muttered. He'd learned long ago that just in case often saved a great deal of trouble later. Later that day, Hazel came by with a new scarf wrapped twice around her neck, her breath puffing in small clouds. "It's begun," she announced cheerfully, brushing frost from her fur. "The frost patterns on my window look exactly like fern leaves. I'm convinced nature's showing off." Bramble laughed. "Well, if it is, it's doing a fine job of it." They took a walk along the river, which now shimmered with a thin skin of ice near the edges. The water gurgled softly beneath, moving slow and sure, like the breath of a sleeping creature. As they passed the willow, Hazel stopped. Its branches hung heavy and still, each strand beaded with frozen dew that glinted like tiny lanterns. "It looks different," she said softly. Bramble nodded. "Older, maybe, or wiser." But there was something else, a faint hum beneath the frost. It wasn't sound exactly, more a vibration in the air, like a thought not yet spoken. Hazel tilted her head, frowning. "You hear that?" she whispered. Bramble listened, and for a moment he did. A pulse, deep and slow, almost like a heartbeat. Then it was gone, swallowed by the chill wind. They exchanged a glance. Neither spoke of it again, but both felt it linger. That evening, when Bramble returned home, he found his lantern, the one he'd made for the fair, faintly glowing on its shelf. It hadn't done that since the summer. He touched it gently. The light grew brighter, just for a heartbeat, then dimmed again. "Still with us, are you?" he murmured. Outside, frost whispered across the ground, tracing its invisible fingers through the grass. The forest slept, but not in silence. Something beneath the surface was still awake, watching, waiting. By mid-November, the world had settled into its slow rhythm of cold. The river had hardened at the edges. The last of the leaves had drifted away. The forest wore its quiet like a blanket. For Bramble, the season meant long mornings beside the fire and even longer afternoons mending things. A cracked mug, a loose hinge, the old broom handle that always seemed to splinter just when it was most needed. Hazel spent her days in a flurry of invention. She was building what she called a device for indoor rain. "It's not really rain," she explained one morning, lugging a series of small copper pipes into Bramble's burrow. "More like mist. For humidity. Plants need it." Bramble watched as she arranged the contraption across his table, attaching a kettle at one end and a funnel at the other. "You're going to fill my house with steam, aren't you?" "Possibly," she said, but scientifically. By the time Mole arrived that afternoon, the burrow was indeed full of mist. He blinked, wiping condensation from his spectacles. "Blimey," he coughed. "Feels like I've dug into a cloud." Hazel adjusted a valve. "It's a prototype." Bramble sighed good-naturedly and opened a window. "Let's have tea before my fur curls." The three friends sat around the fire, sipping slowly. Outside, snow had begun to fall. Thin at first, then steadier, blanketing the world in white. Mole gazed at it dreamily. You know, he said, the first snow always feels like forgiveness. Everything covered, everything quiet again. Hazel smiled faintly. Forgiveness for what? For being messy, Mole said simply. For forgetting things. For rushing. Bramble chuckled. You're getting poetic in your old age. I'm not old, Mole grumbled. Just seasoned. When the snow stopped, a hush followed. The kind that settles deep into the bones of the forest. Bramble stood and stretched. I think I'll take a walk. Hazel blinked. In this cold, just to the willow, he said. The air outside was still, so still it felt sacred. Each crunch of his paw steps echoed. The willow stood silent, heavy with snow, its branches glistening like spun glass. He brushed a bit of snow from one of its roots, and beneath it, saw something faint, a soft blue glow. The light pulsed once, twice. He crouched, heart thudding. You again, he whispered. The glow shimmered brighter, spreading across the frozen ground, tracing faint patterns, like the veins of leaves or river deltas. Then, slowly, it faded, leaving only frost and shadow. Bramble stayed there a while, not afraid but thoughtful. He didn't know what it meant, but he felt somehow that the forest was speaking, not urgently, but gently, as if reminding him of something long forgotten. When he returned home, Hazel was fast asleep by the fire, her half-finished contraption humming softly beside her. Mole snored in an armchair. Bramble set the glowing lantern beside them and smiled. Good night, he whispered, though he wasn't sure whether he was speaking to his friends, the willow, or the forest itself. Snow deepened as December arrived. The paths between the burrows grew narrow. Even the river seemed slower, wrapped in ice and mist. Bramble's lantern continued to glow faintly every few nights, without reason. Sometimes it pulsed in rhythm with the wind. Other times, it brightened when Hazel laughed or when Mole began one of his long, rambling stories. Hazel naturally decided to study it. She spent hours sketching, measuring, and jotting down notes. It's not reacting to temperature, she muttered one morning, or light, or even sound. It's responding to us, Bramble said simply. She looked up. That's not very scientific. Doesn't mean it's wrong. He was right. The lantern glowed most when they were together, when laughter filled the burrow, or when the three sat in companionable silence by the fire. One night, as they sipped tea and watched snow drift past the window, Hazel suddenly set her cup down. I think it's remembering. Remembering what? Mole asked. The summer, she said softly. The crickets, the fair, the willow's song. It's holding it all, everything that's happened. Bramble gazed at the little lantern, its gentle light flickering across their faces. Then maybe that's what it was for, he said. Not just to guide us, but to keep the story alive. The room fell quiet. Outside, the wind sighed through the trees, not mournful but full like breath. Later that night, when the others had gone to bed, Bramble stayed awake. The lantern glowed on the table beside him, steady and warm. He watched it for a long while, the reflection of its flame dancing in his eyes. Then, softly, he whispered, "Thank you." The lantern brightened once, just a heartbeat of golden light, and then dimmed to a gentle glow. Bramble smiled. He didn't need to understand it. Some mysteries, he thought, were gifts, not puzzles. The next morning, the snow outside was untouched and pure. The forest still slept, but somewhere beneath the surface, the heartbeat continued, faint, patient, eternal. And under the willow's roots, deep and hidden, a single crystal pulsed softly, not with magic but memory. The thaw began quietly, as all great changes do. There was no sudden rush or roar, only the gentlest dripping sound. A soft plink that echoed from the eaves and hollow logs. Bramble was the first to notice, rising early one morning to fetch wood and pausing mid-step when he heard it. It was faint, barely a whisper beneath the stillness, but unmistakable. He smiled and turned his face toward the light filtering through the frosted window. The air smelled different, a little warmer, carrying the faint, earthy scent of damp bark and wet moss. "Spring's thinking about it," he murmured. Inside, Hazel was bent over her newest contraption, a drip-measuring device that she had jury-rigged from a teapot, 3 spoons, and a bent bit of wire. Mole was asleep by the fire, his nose twitching each time the kettle hissed. Bramble stoked the embers and began preparing porridge. The oats crackled softly as he stirred, and for the first time in weeks, he cracked open the window to let the air flow in. The cool breeze swept through the burrow, mingling with the smell of oats and wood smoke, crisp and promising. When the others woke, they decided to walk to the river, bundled in scarves and mittens. The snow was still thick in places, but soft now, sinking underfoot, revealing flashes of dark soil and pale shoots daring to rise. The river ran free at its center, the ice breaking apart in long silver ribbons. A single duck drifted past, quacking lazily, as though she'd been there all along, waiting for company. "Listen," Hazel whispered. They did. The forest was full of small sounds, dripping, shifting, cracking. The world was waking up, stretching its limbs after a long slumber. Near the willow, something new had appeared. The roots, now free of frost, glistened with moisture, and from one of them, the same hollow where the glow had once pulsed, there now grew a single green sprout. Bramble knelt beside it. "It's early," he said softly. Hazel crouched beside him, eyes bright. "Maybe it's a sign. Something about the lantern and the tree. They're connected, you know. The way it glowed, the timing." Mole tilted his head. "Maybe it's just a sprout." They all laughed, but Bramble's gaze lingered. There was something familiar in that small, brave shoot, something that felt like the first page of a new chapter. That night, he wrote in a winter journal, the first green thing of the year. "I think the forest is remembering how to breathe again." The next few days brought a slow and steady melt. Puddles formed in the hollows of old roots, and the air filled with the chatter of returning birds. Every morning, Hazel threw open the windows to let in the smell of damp leaves and thawed soil, declaring it the perfume of renewal. One morning, as they walked the path by the river, they noticed something odd, a cluster of tiny bubbles rising steadily from beneath the melting ice. Hazel crouched immediately. "Look at that. There's movement down there." Bramble leaned closer. "Fish, perhaps." "Not that steady," Hazel said. "It's like a spring, an underground pocket of air." Mole, peering through his spectacles, frowned. No, that's too regular. Maybe something mechanical?" They all turned to him. "Mechanical?" Bramble said. "Well," Mole stammered, "I don't mean machinery, obviously, but something rhythmic, like a ticking clock." Hazel's eyes sparkled. "A water clock?" Before Bramble could protest, she was already taking notes, her pencil flying across her notebook. "We'll need to investigate. When the ice breaks fully, we'll follow the bubbles to their source." Over the following week, they did just that. Each day, they checked the spot, watching as the ice retreated, until at last they could see the water clearly. There, half buried in the silt, something glinted, faintly metallic. Bramble rolled up his sleeves. "All right then, let's see what our mechanical fish is." It took careful digging, but eventually they freed it. A small, ornate object, a bronze disc with delicate engravings and a set of tiny paddles around its edge. When turned in the water, it whirred faintly, as if remembering an old rhythm. Hazel's whiskers trembled with excitement. "It's a current clock, a sort of tide measurer perhaps from long ago. Who'd have lost such a thing?" Bramble wondered aloud. Mole tapped it gently. Someone who lived by the river, maybe, or someone who listened to it more closely than most. They carried the object home and cleaned it carefully. Under the grime, they found words etched around its rim, almost worn away but still readable, to chart the time that runs beneath all seasons. Hazel traced the letters with a paw. It's poetic. Bramble placed it on the mantel beside the lantern. Then it belongs here. That night, the lantern glowed again, brighter than it had in months. And just for a moment, the faint sound of rushing water filled the room. Not outside, but deep within the walls, as if the house itself were remembering the river's pulse. The first true day of spring arrived with rain, a soft, steady drizzle that made everything shine. The snow melted completely, and the forest floor erupted with moss and pale shoots. Bramble awoke to the sound of the rain tapping gently on the window pane. Hazel was already awake, sketching the droplets as they slid down the glass. Mole was humming tunelessly by the fire, and from somewhere outside came the faint creak of wet branches. They had no particular plans for the day, which made it perfect. They brewed a pot of strong tea, cut slices of hazelnut bread, and watched the rain turn the paths to mirrors. When the clouds finally broke, Bramble suggested a walk. The air outside was thick with the scent of wet bark and the faint sweetness of thawed earth. The river rushed fast now, gleaming brown and gold under the sunlight. When they reached the willow, they found the single sprout had grown taller, and around it, several others had appeared, small, tender leaves pushing through the soil. Hazel knelt close. "It's not a single plant," she whispered. "It's a whole ring." Indeed, the shoots were forming a rough circle around the willow's base. And in the center, something faint shimmered beneath the soil, a soft, golden line connecting each sprout like thread. Bramble touched it gently. It pulsed once, faint as a heartbeat. Hazel looked at him, eyes wide. "Do you think it's—" "I don't know," he said softly, "but I think the lantern's light came from this." The next evening, as dusk fell, they returned with the lantern. It flickered in the gathering shadows, casting its gentle glow upon the roots. As they set it down, the golden line brightened, flowing softly from sprout to sprout, and the willow itself seemed to sigh, a long, rustling exhale that stirred every leaf in the clearing. Hazel placed a paw on Bramble's arm. "It's awake." He nodded. It never really slept. The glow lasted only a few moments before fading back to the faint, natural shimmer of rain-wet bark. But the feeling lingered, the quiet certainty that something old and kind had stirred just enough to remind them it was there. That night, the three sat by the fire again, each lost in thought. Mole finally broke the silence. "Do you think it remembers us?" he asked softly. Hazel smiled. "I think we're part of what it remembers." Bramble nodded. "And what it teaches?" Outside, the rain began again, tapping softly against the windows. The willow swayed in rhythm, and somewhere beneath its roots, the faint golden thread continued to hum, connecting, remembering, waiting for the next turn of the seasons. Thank you for joining us in the quiet corners of Chestnut Hollow. If you enjoyed this story and would like to wander with us again, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with others who love cozy woodland adventures. Until next time, may your days be gentle and your evenings restful.